So welcome to the Skip Logic, What's the Question session. I'm Rachel Coughlin, and along with Misty Parkinson, we'll be going through the presentation. So I just wanted to start off by saying there's going to be plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of the session. So we have microphones down here on this level, so if you think you may have questions, just so folks know if you're sitting in the upper level to be able to answer questions to come down at the end of the session. So there's going to be a couple of things that Misty and I want to cover today. We sort of want to define what is skip logic. I think that's a term that is used a lot, and we want to explain what it means to us and what it means to the FAFSA form, the FAFSA website, and the mobile application. So and then we're going to talk about, okay, what is it? Then how do we actually use it? And why is it a benefit? You know, what's such a good thing about being able to skip items? And then we're going to wrap up with what's on the horizon. So how do you actually go ahead or we'll talk about some of the things that are upcoming in terms of how we can use skip logic in all of our applications. So the first thing we want to talk about is when I say skip logic, what do I actually mean by that? So skip logic is when we use the data that the applicant or parent is entering into the application to decide which questions to display, or I think also more importantly, which questions we don't need to display. Which questions can they actually skip and we don't need to show the user. This skip logic, we apply it in both our applications, whether it's an initial application or a renewal application, and we also apply the same logic or business rules in our corrections. Skip logic history has been around since the paper FAFSA forms started. If anybody's ever really gone back and looked at the paper FAFSA or the PDF FAFSA now, you'll see on there, you know, the earliest versions of the skip logic were if you answered A to this question, skip 2 questions down. If you answered B, go to the next question. So that was our earliest form of skip logic where we were guiding the student and the parent through the form to help them indicate that they don't need to actually complete all the questions on the form. Thankfully, when the website and also the mobile app, we like to think that they're smarter as long as we make them smarter. We can even take skip logic one step further. So the questions that we ask on the website or the mobile app don't always match the order that they're asked in the FAFSA form. And we do this for a couple of reasons because it allows us to make decisions early on that we can then send the student or the parent down the path of the least questions that they need to give us. And so we'll talk about that skip logic. There's some pretty easy skip logic, and then when you get to auto zero and simplified needs, a little bit more complex skip logic that we use in the form. So when the student or the parent is able to skip the question, what that means is it's just hidden. We don't show them the question. So the student or the parent doesn't even realize that that question exists because it's not required, so we're not going to show them to it to fill it out. It's not like we show it to them and it's just optional. We just don't show the question. So why do we do skip logic? I think the main reasons are you get a customized user experience. Just like we've talked about, if we use skip logic, we're also asking them the minimal number of questions that we need to get the data on the FAFSA form. And so because of skip logic, there are a multitude of paths through our products depending on how the family is filling out the actual form. So what is skip logic? What doesn't it do? The one thing it won't do is if there's a required field out there based on the data that the student's entering in, they're not going to be allowed to skip it. We're going to show the applicant or the user that field, and we're going to require them to enter that in. So it doesn't allow, if we're using skip logic, for a user to actually create or submit an incomplete application. So we're going to talk a little bit about, we've talked about what is skip logic. So basically it's how do we get through the user through the application asking the minimal number of questions but getting all the data that we need. So what does that really look like on fafsa.gov and on the My Student Aid, the My FAFSA mobile app? So here's some easy ones that we start with. So the first one is the U.S. citizenship question. If you say, yes, I'm a U.S. citizen, we're not going to show you the alien registration number question. But conversely, if you answer, yes, I'm an eligible non-citizen, then we are going to show the alien registration number question, and we're going to make the user actually answer that question because of how they answered the citizenship question. Another example is for the male-female question. If you say that you're female, or if you say that you're a male, but based on your date of birth, you're over 26, we're not going to ask the selective service question. So depending on how you answered, if you answer you are male and based on your date of birth, you're under 26, we are going to show that selective service question. So it's a way, once again, for us to have a slightly different path through the application depending on the data the user is providing to us. Dependency status. So for the dependency questions, if you answer any of what we call, I think everybody knows there's 13 questions that we can use to determine somebody's dependency, whether they're dependent or independent. If you answer yes to any of the first 5, which you see on the slide here is the age, the born before, the marital status, are you married, are you working on a graduate degree, do you have children, or do you have other legal dependents? So if you answer yes to any of those 5 questions, we're not going to display the other 8 questions, because at that point we've determined you're independent and we're going to start sending you down that path. One of the things that's new for the mobile-friendly website is now if you answer no to all of those questions, you're going to get a page that has the remaining questions, and it's just a checkbox. So before in the application, you would see question, question, and you kept answering no, 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 no. So now you'll see those remaining questions, and the user can check any of them that apply, or they can say none of the above, and we'll set them to a dependent. So here's an example in terms of how we can use skip logic, and you can sort of see at a high level what we don't have to show the user or what path they don't need to go down. So in this example, on the one side, you'll see the page that has the student's age, marital status, and degree, and then the next page has the do you have children or do you have other legal dependents? So if they answer yes to any one of those 5 questions, all the pages on the other side are not displayed to the user. So those are all questions, pages, or views that the user won't ever see. So that's a good use of skip logic, because now they don't need to go down that whole path or see information that may actually confuse them. So once we determine that you're an independent, we're going to then do another branch of skip logic. So if you're independent, we're not going to automatically not show you all of the parental questions. We have to ask you, because there are some programs that even if you're an independent, you need to provide the parental data. But if you say you're an independent and you say, nope, I'm not going to provide parental data, then these are all the pages that the user gets to skip at that point. So all of these pages or views contain all of the information that would be on the parents section of the FAFSA form. And then also another good use of the skip logic is for the non-tax filers. So when you're giving your financial information, if you say, I'm not going to file taxes, then all the questions that are applicable only to the tax filers are skipped. So you would see in a situation like that, if you're not going to file, here's all of the fields that you would skip. We're not going to ask you AGI, exemptions, taxes paid, any of the information that would come off of your tax forms. We're just going to skip those questions. And what's been good is with the redesign of the application on the website, and then also with the mobile app, is we've reorganized those fields. We talked about reorganizing these fields so that instead of just having to take somebody to a view and not show 2 or 3 of the questions, we don't have to show that whole view or page at all, because in this example, since they're not going to file, we're not going to require any of the tax information. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Misty, and she's going to have the pleasure of going through the auto zero and simplified needs.
Thanks, Rachel. Good morning, everybody. So you saw the large volume of pages that a user gets to skip if they are an independent student choosing not to provide parent information. So that's really the best way for somebody to shorten the FAFSA form. Another way to really simplify the FAFSA experience is for the student to be eligible for an automatic zero EFC and be from a state that allows for the skipping of questions that are not included in the EFC calculation in that scenario. So I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about the details related to the simplified needs test, the automatic zero EFC formula, which is a subset of the simplified needs test, and then people who don't qualify for either, but who may still be able to skip some questions. So the logic for qualifying for the simplified needs test is on the next slide, and I will explain it to you. But I want to point out on this slide first that if somebody is eligible for the simplified needs test or the automatic zero EFC, then the CPS is calculating their EFC based on very specific information and ignoring other information. If the student reports their state of legal residence as one of the states that's listed on this slide, even though the CPS will not consider the answers to a whole group of questions, those states require that we collect the answers to those questions. So whether or not somebody is able to experience that simplified application online is dependent upon their state of legal residence. So that's very important. So the details of the simplified needs test and the automatic zero EFC. So it is different depending on your dependency status. If you are an independent student, then obviously we're making a determination based on the information you've provided about you and your spouse if you're married. If the student is a dependent student, then eligibility for the simplified needs test is based totally on the parent's information. The qualifications for the simplified needs test, which allows for the exclusion of assets in the calculation, are for a tax filer that the AGI is less than $50,000. So that's the main criteria. If the AGI is more than $50,000, then that student is not going to qualify for the simplified needs test. They will be required to answer the remaining income and asset questions, but we will not ask them any of the questions that are specifically asked to determine whether they qualify for the simplified needs test. If your income says you don't qualify, then we don't need to ask you any other questions to determine that. We're just going to ask you the remaining financial questions. So if your AGI is less than $50,000 and you filed a tax return, and you also filed a 1040A or EZ, you're eligible. If you did not file a 1040A or EZ, then we'll ask you if you are a dislocated worker. And if you say that you're a dislocated worker, you're eligible. If you say you're not a dislocated worker, then we'll ask you if you received any of the means-tested benefits. And if you say that you did, you're eligible. And if you didn't, then we will ask you if you were eligible to file a 1040A or EZ. And if you say that you did, you're eligible. If you say that you didn't, we have no more questions to ask you to determine your eligibility for simplified needs, and we will just go ahead and start asking you the remaining financial questions. If you did not file a tax return, then eligibility is based solely on the total income earned from work. If the total income earned from work is less than $50,000, then you're eligible, and we won't ask you any of these other questions. So that's for the simplified needs test. For the automatic zero EFC, which allows for the exclusion of a lot more information, it's the assets. For an independent student, it's the taxes paid, exemptions, all of the additional financial information and untaxed income fields, and the assets. And for a dependent student, it's all of that for the parents and all of the financial information about the student. So it's a lot of questions that they're able to skip. In order to qualify for an automatic 0 EFC, it's the same criteria that I just went over with a few exceptions. First is the income threshold. The income amount has to be less than $26,000, sorry, equal to or less than $26,000. For a dependent student, if the parent's AGI, and they're a tax filer, is less than or equal to $26,000, and they meet any of that other criteria that I just went over, then they're eligible for the automatic 0 EFC. If they're a non-tax filer, it's income earned from work equal to or less than $26,000. If it's an independent student and the income is equal to or less than $26,000, in addition to one of these other criteria, dislocated worker, means tested benefits, et cetera, they also have to have dependents other than a spouse. If they don't have dependents other than a spouse, then even if their income is less than $26,000, they do not qualify for an automatic 0 EFC, but they do still qualify for the simplified needs test. So they would still be able to skip assets. So we make the determination of eligibility in several different locations, and that is because, again, because of the skip logic. The way that the website is set up, we, I believe, are still asking those questions on the same view, but we display them based or not, based on how you answered a previous question. For the mobile app, every question is on its own page. So you will skip entire pages as opposed to having a dynamic page that adds questions as needed. So every time that we are collecting a piece of information that is part of that determination, we're checking to see if the applicant has met the criteria. So first thing that they report, are they a tax filer? If they say they're a tax filer, then they report their AGI. If their AGI is $50,000 or more, then we've determined they're not eligible for simplified needs, and that's done. We're not going to do any more checking. If their income is less than $50,000, then we're going to ask them what type of tax return they filed. And if they say that they filed a 1040A or EZ or a tax return from Puerto Rico or one of the trust territories, then they've met the criteria. We make the determination there. We don't have to ask any other questions to determine eligibility. If they filed a 1040 or a foreign return, then we will ask them the next question, because we're making a determination. They still may qualify, but they don't yet. So let's ask the next question. Next question is dislocated worker. Based on how they answer that, we do the check again. Based on the results of the check, we're either done asking the questions or we're asking another question. So we're making this determination at multiple different points in the application. So I mentioned that if somebody qualifies for the simplified needs test, they can skip asset questions. If they qualify for an automatic 0 EFC, they also can skip the asset questions. But there is another way that our users could skip the asset questions, and that is based on the answer to the asset threshold question, which was something that we added a few years ago, and it's based on the portion of the EFC calculation that looks at the total asset protection allowance. If the applicant, if the applicant for an independent student or the parents for a dependent student report a total amount of assets that are lower than the asset protection allowance, then it doesn't even matter that they reported them, because we're not counting those assets in the calculation. And so a few years ago, we decided to ask a question: do your assets exceed this amount? And that amount is calculated based on their marital status and date of birth. It displays the asset protection amount there, and if the parent or applicant indicates that their assets do not exceed that amount, we don't make them answer the asset questions. If they say that they do exceed that amount, then they're required to answer all three of the asset questions. Just like with the simplified needs test and automatic 0 EFC skip logic rules, state of legal residence is a factor. in whether the website will allow somebody to skip the asset questions, or sorry, to see the asset threshold question. The asset threshold question also will not display for the student if the student is a dependent student. If you went to the EFC calculation session, I don't know how much detail they went into, but you may have seen that we consider the assets of an independent student and a parent very differently than we consider the assets of a dependent student. So there is no threshold that is the same for a dependent student as for the parents and an independent student. So this screen is showing you the questions that different users will see on the website that gives them the option to skip the asset question. So in the upper left, you see the question that they get if they're eligible for the simplified needs test and they're from a state that allows for the skipping of questions, so any state that wasn't listed on that earlier slide. So we simply ask if they want to skip questions about the parent's assets. In the upper right, you'll see the question for Auto Zero, and in this case, it's about skipping more than just the assets. It's skipping all of the additional financial information and the assets. So we ask if they want to skip the remaining questions about their income and assets as well as their parents' income and assets. And then the bottom one is the asset threshold question. As of today, does the total amount of your parents' current assets exceed? And then the dollar amount is dynamically displayed based on the asset protection allowance that applies to that user. So these are the pages that would be skipped if somebody either says yes, they want to skip the assets because they qualify for the simplified needs test, or they indicate that their assets do not exceed the threshold when they don't qualify for simplified needs or automatic zero EFC. So the left view is for the parent's assets and the right view is for the student assets. And if it's a dependent student that's eligible for the simplified needs test, they would be able to skip both of these pages. And if we have a dependent student who is a non-tax filer and eligible for an automatic zero EFC and their state of legal residence allows skipping, look how awesome that is. All of those pages get to be skipped. So skip logic is basically, it's the concept that we built the entire electronic FAFSA experience on. As you know, we didn't pick the questions for the FAFSA. That's something that, political people, chose, and removing any of them or changing any of them would require legislative changes. So there's a limit to what we can do. However, I think we all agree that the FAFSA needs to be as simple as possible, so we're getting the right information in order to properly calculate people's eligibility and making it as easy as possible for people to complete the form. And so we built the entire electronic application around skip logic so that we keep all of the questions that are required to be asked on the FAFSA, but only present the ones that are relevant for that particular user based on the way that they have answered the other questions. So, what is coming up? If you attended the federal update yesterday, then you heard a mention of this. And if you attended our session right before this one with the FAFSA update, then you heard a little more detail. But the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 is going to be very impactful to the FAFSA, in particular to people who qualify for the simplified needs test or automatic zero EFC, primarily because of the criteria that looks at whether somebody filed a 1040A or 1040EZ form, and if they didn't file one, whether they were eligible to file one. So the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 was passed by Congress in December of 2017, and it impacts the 2018 tax forms, which we will all start filing very shortly. You can go out and see what they look like. There was a public comment period, and we have looked at those things backwards and forwards. Basically, the 1040A, 1040EZ, and 1040 were all combined into one tax form, which is a postcard tax form. It's like this, front and back. And the questions that don't fit there have been moved to 6 new schedules, which are numbered 1 through 6. We still have the same schedules that we had before, I believe. I'm not aware that we've lost any of those, but the individual fields that were previously on the 1040 form have been moved to these other schedules. So we have been struggling to figure out how we are going to adapt the FAFSA based on these changes. We are still working with the IRS, and I think that the forms are still considered draft, although the IRS has indicated they feel fairly confident that they won't see any further significant changes. But we have tried to identify a way to come up with a proxy that represents those people who previously filed or were eligible to file a 1040A or EZ. And what we've come up with is Schedule 1. We believe that the questions that were previously only on the 1040 and not on the 1040A or EZ now are being asked on Schedule 1. And so if somebody filed a Schedule 1, then they would previously have been required to file a 1040, which means not eligible for simplified needs or automatic zero EFC unless their income was less than $50,000 and they met a different criteria. If they don't file a Schedule 1, we believe that's a proxy for people who previously filed or were eligible to file a 1040A or EZ. So the IRS, we're consulting with the IRS to see if they agree with us that this is a reasonable proxy. And if they agree, then our plan is to replace the existing question that asks if the user was eligible to file a 1040A or EZ with a question that instead asks if they filed a Schedule 1. And if they say that they did file a Schedule 1, then they would have to answer additional questions in order to become eligible for simplified needs or auto zero. And if they say they didn't, then they would be eligible. So right now, if you have memorized the online FAFSA as we have, then you know that the last of the questions that we ask to determine eligibility for simplified needs or auto zero is the one that asks if you're eligible to file a 1040A or EZ. And that's because when we implemented the skip logic and tried to figure out like which questions would be harder for people to answer, which ones might they stand a better chance of getting right, we chose obviously type of tax return filed. Everybody's got to answer that anyway, but we chose dislocated worker first, means tested benefits second, and eligible to file 1040A or EZ last. We believe that if we change the question to ask about filing a Schedule 1, that we're going to move that up to the top of the list. And primarily that's because the vast majority of the people who are eligible for the simplified needs test are eligible because of the type of tax return they filed. We also are hoping that at some point we might possibly be able to get the IRS to tell us if somebody filed the Schedule 1 and pass that information through the IRS data retrieval tool. And if that's possible, then that may eliminate the need for some people to actually answer that question. So it's all speculation right now. The only thing that's fact is that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 was passed by Congress in December of 2017. We will have new tax forms to file in 2018, and we are working out the details right now with respect to what the impacts will be to the FAFSA. So don't quote me on anything I said. But I wanted you all to at least have an idea of what we're thinking, because we have a fairly large population of people who qualify for this simplified path, and we don't want to take that away from people. It is a way of getting the aid to the right people, simplifying the form as much as we can for people. And so this is the way that we're thinking right now, that we'll be able to implement the changes from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So here are a couple of links in the event that you were unaware of these changes or you just heard about them but didn't really know any of the details. The text of the law is available online, so you can go out and take a look at it. And then also the draft IRS forms. I know the 1040 form itself is out there, believe the schedules are out there, and I think that they have some instructions out there now too. So if you want more information to be, better prepared for, dealing with FAFSAs that are pulling data from a brand-new tax return, this is where you want to go to get that information. So that is all we have for our prepared slides. We did this session a few years ago, and we got a lot of questions, so we wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time to address them. So if anybody has any questions to ask, our microphones are over here and over here. Hi. They're testing it. No, it's.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Sorry about that. Good morning. I think I've probably asked this question before, so I'll bring it up one more time with the skip logic. With the simple needs test, the auto zero test, if you are a zero tax filer, not filing, no wages, it skips the federal needs benefits test questions.
Yes.
And so basically what that means to a school is we get a blank FAFSA. There is no data on it except for the student's name and, in identifiers, and so we don't know how the student supports themselves, and we find a lot of those students are also getting selected for verification, so now we have to kind of jump through hoops, get the non-tax filing letter, ask them how they support themselves. And so I was wondering if it would display the federal benefits test, you could see that they received these benefits. That, I don't know if that would change the logic with the way you select for verification, but at least the FAFSA wouldn't be blank, and so I know there's a number of schools that are not comfortable getting that blank FAFSA and just taking it as is.
So the only purpose of that question for FAFSA purposes is to determine somebody's eligibility for the simplified needs test. Are you suggesting that we make everybody answer it, or are you suggesting that we change our logic for a particular population of people?
For a particular population that is non-tax filing, zero wages, I think you should still ask that question, like I said, because a number of those students are being selected for verification, and so I would think that if they answered that question, demonstrated they are getting the government benefits, you may not select them for verification at that point either. And like I said, a school like mine, when we see a blank FAFSA, because a student could just go through it real quick and say no to everything, and we're like, well, really, how do you exist then if your FAFSA is blank? And so it causes us what we're perceiving as conflicting information, even though they're not even being shown the question.
Okay, we can take that back as a suggestion. I do just want to point out something that you said about if we asked the question, then perhaps they wouldn't be selected for verification. The verification selection criteria is like top secret, locked in a vault logic.
Obviously.
I don't think it would be a good idea for anybody to assume that something like that could change the results, but we certainly can take it back as a suggestion.
But
Does
the more
anybody else have
data
any-
the more data you have, whatever algorithms you're using for verification, this might be something that programmatically could be looked at, is all
Right.
I'm suggesting.
Does anybody
Thank
else
you.
have any feedback on that suggestion? Agree, disagree, neutral?
Hi. I was going to basically ask the exact same question because it is a big concern for us also when we see FAFSAs with everything's blank. Nobody lives on nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So, it doesn't make sense that somebody can file a blank. There aren't even zeros in any of the income or asset fields. It doesn't make sense to see that. So I think
Okay.
something needs to be done to.
Yep, we'll take that back. We do have a very long list of enhancement suggestions for the FAFSA, and we do review those and prioritize them, so we will definitely make sure that that's on our list. Yes?
Good morning. My name is Matthew Flores, and I work over at Maricopa Community Colleges over in Phoenix, Arizona. The question I have regarding the skip logic is similar to the questions that have been going on earlier today. In relation to sending corrections to FAFSA from the institution, may that be in relation to verification or a special circumstance. When the student completes the FAFSA, they may be eligible for the simplified needs test or the auto zero, but then after the college goes over and sends their corrections, they're no longer eligible, or now they get the rejection code requiring them to answer the asset information. Does the skip logic notice that when the assets are now being required, that it now defaults and allows the students to answer those questions? Because what we've been noticing is when we send those corrections after the student indicated that they were eligible for that, but now they have to answer that. When they try to go back to provide that information, they're actually not able to. We're not sure if it's as a result of them using the mobile app or if it's through the website, maybe as a result of the skip logic, but they've been having a lot of issues trying to actually answer that information regarding the assets. Is the skip logic able to determine that, oh, now that it's needed, we'll no longer do the calculation, go ahead and do that? Or is there, or is the skip logic going, well, you're still eligible for it, so we're not going to answer it, but you also have this this reject code, so we're now in, you know.
No, the FAFSA is very smart. So I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So they submitted the original FAFSA, and then you made a determination that a question was answered incorrectly, and you had the student go back and make that correction. Is that right?
No. More so
You made
like,
the correction.
yeah, so like if, say, for example, student gets selected for verification, we do the process, and I usually state the favorite question regarding verification is the eligible for 1048 AEZ. Student says, yes, I'm eligible. We do the result and go, no, you're not. But as a result, now they're no longer eligible, and they have to answer the asset.
Right.
Does the skip logic allow them to answer that, or is it because they were eligible before that now it's still holding on to the fact that they don't have to answer it and create a technical conflict, if you will, that prevents the student to go back and provide that info, so that way it could be an official EFC?
So I'm getting confused because I'm hearing you say that you're making a correction and you wouldn't be able to submit it unless unless you answered all of those questions. So I'm confused about how the student is going back and having a problem, because if you made the correction such that they're no longer eligible, you can't submit that unless you also then provide the missing information. Isn't that correct? Are you submitting it, or are you just making that change and then telling them, oh, you need to go make the change yourself?
No. We go over to make the corrections as we normally do. It goes to Department of Ed.
But
They
it can't
process
go to the Department of Ed unless you answer what is now missing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so we answer that question, the eligible 1048 AEZ,
Okay.
for example. We answer it to no based on the documentation we provide.
And so now you have to provide the assets and things like that?
Yes, as a
Okay.
result of Department of Ed processing it, it comes back and goes, okay, we processed it, we're good, but now we need assets. And the student most likely gets a notification either from the school or from Department of Ed saying, hey, there's a reject code, now you need to provide assets.
Should like be a batch. You won't have all that, not like that. But the student should be able to go back in and we would re-execute and reevaluate all the simplified needs and auto
Okay,
sales.
okay. So Rachel says that because you're doing this via a batch, that you are not hitting the same edits that you would hit if you were doing it online. And so you're submitting it without the assets. So it should result in a rejected transaction. So
Yes.
then if the student goes in and retrieves that, as they navigate through the correction screens, then we run the edits, and we would display an edit telling them that they are required to report their assets.
Okay, and that's why I wasn't sure, because I know we've received a lot of feedback from the students as a result that they're not able to get into, to provide that information to submit on their behalf to answer the asset questions for some reason, and.
So they're
we're
not getting into the form at all, or they get to that page and the asset questions are not displaying?
The latter.
The asset questions are not displaying.
I've got
I
it
think
captured, so
it's-
we can go
okay,
back and
we'll
run
take
some
a look.
scenarios and check.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
We'll go back and see if there's a problem. Thank you.
Hi, you might have explained this and I just missed it, but I'm wondering why it even gives them the option to skip the asset questions or not. I mean, if you've determined they're eligible, why doesn't it just skip them? I'm trying to think of a circumstance in which they would want to answer the questions when they don't have to.
So one of our many challenges is that we are the federal government and we know what we need for the EFC calculation. But this form is used by a lot of other people, state grant agencies, institutions, scholarship organizations, things like that. So we are better able to get information from states than we are institutions, because there's a lot of you. So we primarily are building this based on the needs of the federal calculation. States let us know if they need information that we don't need for any reason. And if you were here and saw the earlier slide, you can
Yeah.
see the list of states that
Yeah.
say, yeah, I need it. And so in those instances, people are not asked if they want to skip. They just go right through and answer the questions. If a state has indicated to us that it's not required, the student is given the choice because perhaps they're going to an institution that requires it, or perhaps they're applying for a scholarship that requires it. We don't know. We don't know who else needs it or why they might want to provide it, and so it's offered as a choice. Rachel can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we assume the answer is yes, they want to skip, and I believe that those are questions where we default the answer, so they would have to actively change it in order to provide their information. Yes.
Hi there. I have a quick question to clear up some confusion on the selective service question. So if a student is male, is under 26, they need to. I've been recently working, financial aid high school nights where I have a lot of under 18 students, and I have had several parents at these events tell me that their student is under 18, and when they indicate that, it tells them that they have to go back later to their FAFSA. I thought years ago, I remember there being a question where you can just say, would you like FAFSA to register the student? Can you just clear up, just so I understand, when does that pop up? Does that question pop up before the student's 18, or do they have to wait until their 18th birthday before that question would pop up?
Yeah, so if you meet the criteria for us to ask if you are registered for selective service, if you say, no, you're not registered, then we pop up that question,
Regardless of a birth date?
regardless of the birth date.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
so
you
if you're
so-
under
I thought so.
26 and you're not already registered, then we display that question.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, just going back to the question about slide 14 that listed all the states that require you to not be able to skip the income asset question. Who in the state would be, if we were to want to approach them about not skipping those questions, who in the state, I guess, would we talk to? Do you
That's a
know?
really good question. One of our annual activities related to creating the next year's FAFSA is to reach out to NASGAP. And so they help us coordinate with the states. They have contacts for the different state agencies that are members of NASGAP. For states that are not members of NASGAP, I believe we have a list of contacts somewhere. I have to be honest, I feel like I do a lot, but I can't do everything, and so that's not a task I do. And so I don't really know, what information we have versus what information we're relying on NASGAP for. But we partner with them, number one, to get the state deadlines each year, and number two, to verify our list and see if there are any states that want to change their mind. For 2019-20, I believe Hawaii changed their minds. So they are no longer requiring all of the information. They are now allowing students to skip. But no other states have changed their designation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Hello, I had a question and an example to kind of go with that question. Would it be possible for skip logic to allow the skipping of answers that would create conflicting information? And the example I have, the student marked second-year undergraduate for the grade level question, and the student then marks graduate professional degree in the type of degree-seeking question. Obviously, those things can't go together, so depending on how the student answers one question, maybe delete those answers that would create conflicting information.
So that is a tough area. There's like 3 different questions that are sort of asking for different flavors of the same basic piece of information. And we're using it for 2 different purposes. One is to determine dependency status, and the other is to determine whether somebody is not eligible for a Pell Grant. So I'm fuzzy on which ones do what, because they all work together. One of the questions that we ask is used to populate the answer to the question of, are you working on a graduate or professional degree? And so, and we have edits that prevent those from being out of sync in the event that somebody sees that page with the question already answered and tries to change it. But the third question is the one that's grade level, I think. Or is it, I'm mixing them up. It's either grade level or do you have a bachelor's degree that I get confused. Which one is it that sets the dependency question?
It's the graduate professional. When you select
Do you have a bachelor's degree? No.
No, it's not, sorry.
Your grade level,
Yeah.
sorry, the
If
grade
you
level is 6 or
automatically know
7,
that you're a
right?
grad
Yeah,
professional
so-
student, it will automatically populate that they're working on a master's degree in the dependency status
Yes.
questions.
So if you say your grade level is, I think, 6 or 7, it automatically
Say that
populates.
it's yes.
Right. And in the mobile app, you will not even see that question. You don't see the born before, are you married, or the graduate professional, because we know the answers, and so we don't need you to even know that there are those other questions with the same answers. On the website, currently, we only display those if the answers are, I forget which way it goes.
I think it's.
They're all
if-
no.
I thought it was if they're independent.
Okay, so if at least one of the answers is yes, we display it. If they're all no, we don't display it. And a change that we are planning is to never display it so that it is similar to the mobile app. So nobody would be able to get out of sync. Now, currently, if they do get out of sync online, we're not going to let them submit. We pop up an edit and we make them fix it.
Okay, thank you.
So if you're seeing that conflict come through, then people are not filing online.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Is there any skip logic related to the high school completion question? I've started noticing a lot of ICERs coming in with the answer to that being none of the above, when in a prior year they might have said they graduated from high school or they had a GED. Now we're getting almost like it's a default when they don't answer the question of none of the above.
No, we don't have any skip logic there. For a renewal app, if they answered, I think if they answered none of the above in a prior year, we don't carry over an answer. But if they provided any of the other responses in a prior year, we do carry over the answer. But there isn't anything else that triggers any specific logic for that question. There is skip logic that will determine whether or not we ask somebody what high school they went to. If they indicate that they have a high school diploma, then we will ask them where they got it from. Whereas if they say they were homeschooled or got a GED or said none of the above, then we won't ask them about their high school. But that specific question you're asking about, there is not.
Thanks.
I have one other quick question for skip logic. We see at times where a dependent student puts down that they are a resident of a particular state that differs from the state that the parent puts down that they're a resident of. Is there, I mean, and it's almost impossible that that can occur.
The skip logic
So-
on the website is driven by the student's state of legal residence.
But I thought the rule for a dependent student is their state of legal residence is the resident of the custodial parent,
No,
not where the student lives, because they put their school state.
right. The criteria is based on, the criteria for being eligible is based on the parent. So it's the parent's AGI, parents, dislocated worker, tax return type, all that other stuff. But it's based on, but it's the student being eligible or not. And so whether or not they're allowed to skip questions is based on the student's state of
Okay.
legal residence.
Okay.
And the way that it works, both on the website and the app, the student's mailing state is assumed to be the student's state of legal residence. So we'll ask them, like if they say that their mailing address is Texas, we'll ask them, have you lived in Texas for more than 5 years? And if they say yes, then their state of legal residence is Texas. And then we assume that the parent's state of legal residence is Texas. They can change it if it's not. If they say no, they haven't lived in Texas for more than 5 years, then we ask them what their state of legal residence is. We still assume that it's Texas, and they can change it if they want to.
But there's nothing that
So
checking
there's
to make
logic
sure.
that carries the values, but there's nothing that checks student against parent, no. We
Okay.
make it very hard for them to be different, but we're assuming that the student's is correct, so that our logic is
I think that
building
might
the parent's
be a
assumed answer based on
flawed
the student.
assumption that the 19-year-old is going to put the right answer and the parent's not. I think it should be the other way around, to be honest. And full disclosure, I'm from the state of Connecticut, and this means more to us, NASGAP, I belong NASGAP, for state grant programs.
Mm-hmm.
This creates some interesting confusion about schools giving a state grant to a student who says they're a resident of, in my case, Connecticut, but the parents say they're a resident of Massachusetts.
So what is your suggestion?
That your assumption is you look at the state of residency for a dependent student of the parent first, and then compare it to what the student said. Not, it sounds like you're doing it the other way around.
Well, we collect the student information first.
No, I
So are you
understand that.
suggesting that we trigger an edit once we get to the parent one if they change it
Right,
to be
and-
something
and
different?
And give some type of message maybe to the parent that your student indicated that they live in Connecticut, but you've indicated you live in Texas.
Okay, we can take that back as a suggestion. We've not heard that one before.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you all for attending. Enjoy the rest of the conference.